Hey folks, so this morning I did a talk on humility. It was from our collect of the day from yesterday, and the prayer was along the lines of, may we follow the example of Jesus's great humility. Jesus' humility is a demonstration for us. It's a master class in humility, and it's something we should aspire to. It's something we should practice in our lives. Today, I was doing some reading and I stumbled across an audio clip from a pastor in the United States. And in this audio clip, he declares that Donald Trump, as president, and Rush Limbaugh, the now deceased radio pundit, commentator, that they are examples of humility. He goes on to say that they're examples of humility because he truly believes that they were in agreement with God and that they tried to live in obedience to God. And this is why they are such good examples of humility. Now, I would argue that this particular pastor's understanding of humility, it might be a bit off. He does in the audio clip say that not everybody would agree with how they behaved, but they were still humble. What he's describing isn't humility. It's not the be-all and end-all of humility. It's maybe an aspect of humility, but what he's really describing is a person's obedient heart. I could agree with that, with a little caveat that they agreed with their understanding of God, and they sought to obey their understanding of God's will. But I still don't see humility. A person who is humble is recognizable in their humility. We can literally, visibly see them in action. We can hear it in their words. Humility is not something that is well hidden. Despite the fact that that almost sounds like an oxymoron, you can tell when a person is being humble, when they're being sincerely and genuinely humble. At no point did I ever feel that either of these men were offering us an example of humility. At no point in Donald Trump's career, in his life in the public eye, have I ever noticed a moment where I thought he was being humble. As a kid, growing up, I remember in my last year in high school, I would listen to Rush Limbaugh, but at no point did I ever hear him speak humbly. Their humility was never obvious. It was never apparent. As a matter of fact, I suspect Donald Trump might be the type of person who would come along and say, I am the most humblest person you've ever met. You have never met a more humbler person than me. Nobody in the history of humanity has ever been as humble as me. That's not a sign of humility. Arrogance, yes. Pride, yes. But not humility. So when we hold these people up as an example of humility, and I must apologize, I don't believe the pastor actually said they are good examples of humility. He held them up as humble men, which in my estimation is offering them as examples. One of the questions I would ask is, if your son or daughter at 7 or 8 years of age started behaving in these ways, spoke as these men spoke, did as these men did, would you praise them and acclaim them for great humility? Or would you offer correction? Would you try to fix that behavior? If your son or your daughter was getting ready to go out on a date with their best crush, and you heard them speaking the way these men spoke, or doing as these men did and do, would you praise them? Would you acclaim them for their great humility? Or would you offer them correction? Would you offer them a different way, a better way? I would offer correction. I would be mortified if my children offered the world an example of humility that looked like this. The practice of humility for us is very important. Being a person of true humility is a wonderful characteristic, and something we should all aspire to, something we should all practice, something we should all try to achieve in our life. I believe that means following Jesus as that great example. I believe it means following him and watching how he dealt with people. How did he deal with people of authority in the world? How did he deal with rulers, with priests, with those who wielded power over others? He spoke to them, and he spoke harshly to them. But he was also vulnerable to them. He spent time walking and eating and talking with people who would be considered less than himself. But he never spoke down to them. He offered himself to them as an equal. He offered his time to them freely. He offered his energy to them freely. He never demanded anything of them. This is an example of humility we can follow. This is an example of humility that if I were to see my son or my daughter behave in these ways, I would commend them. I would praise them. I would not try to offer them correction. As a matter of fact, I would tell them that I'm watching so that I may become more like them. I suspect us pastors and priests that offer up former President Donald Trump and people like Rush Limbaugh as great examples of humility, people we should aspire to be like, may want to reconsider. And perhaps we could focus on offering up the example of the man that we claim to follow. He's pretty cool. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you, and may you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. And I pray that the example you follow will be that of the Master, the one who offered himself humbly, even unto death. Amen.